So I had someone on TikTok ask me, how do you get your first deal? You're like, how do I find my very first deal? And, someone has asked me that before, and it's really simple. People try to make, finding that first deal something, they try to make it really complicated, act like it's something that's really hard. Um, but all it takes is consistency. Really, that's all it takes. Um, if you look at my screen here, it's all about finding leads. Okay, so all of these houses here represent leads. So these houses will be all of the houses that you run into, that you take a look at once you start doing your marketing. So direct mail, cold calling, texting, whatever you choose to do as your marketing tool, whatever you choose as your marketing tool, you will start to run into leads. So you will start to talk to sellers. Um, they'll call you, you'll talk to them, um, and you'll get to analyze these deals here. You'll start analyzing deals. And with wholesaling and bird dogging, or just investing in general, because we're all trying to buy low and sell high. We're all trying to do this. This is what we're trying to do. Now, if you're a real estate agent, you can buy whether they're up, or you can buy whether they're, when they're down or up. It doesn't really matter when you're a real estate agent, because you're making money off commissions. So the higher the price, the better for real estate agents if they're looking for a commission. I guess they get a commission either way. But the higher the price is, the more they get in commissions. But if they're on the investor side of it, they're trying to buy low too. But us as investors, we're trying to buy low. That's how we make money. We make money by buying low and then selling high. So when you start running into these houses here as you're doing your marketing campaign, and if you want to learn how I do my marketing campaign, then look in the description. I use direct mail, man. I use direct mail. Um, I love direct mail. I got a call today from someone. I'm sending out. I'm sending out right now. I'm sending out 100 mailers, between 100 and 150 mailers per month. So letters per month. Well, I call them mailers. So envelopes with my letters in them and everything else that I put in my envelopes. I'm sending 100 to 150 of those out every month. I'm planning to do more. I had like this challenge that I was trying to do. I was just trying to send out 100 of those every month only. Nothing higher, nothing lower. But I changed my mind. I can do whatever the hell I want to do. I have the money to do it, so I'm planning to send out more. I'm just doing it based off feeling right now. I've been doing this for 9 years, and I have been doing my direct mail campaign, like my output, like how many mailers that I sent out into the world. I've been doing it really off of feeling, off of a feeling, like not really based on numbers. Um, I just get it done and send them out. So I put together my mailers and then I send them out. You have to have a system. That's kind of my point. That's what I was getting to today with this video. You have to have a system. So as you start, like I said, when you start doing your marketing, you start running into these houses and talking to these sellers. Um, More than half of these will be nothing. So this one will be nothing. This one would be nothing. This one would be nothing. This one may be a maybe. This one may be a maybe. This one would be nothing. This one will be nothing. And you're going to close on this one. Okay. And this right here, I have what, 7 houses right here I have drawn. This is not exactly how it will go. You won't run across 7 houses and bam, okay, now you got one that you're going to make money on. It doesn't really work like that. These could represent 7 houses, or this could be 10 houses apiece. This could represent 10 houses apiece. And so, here you went through 60 probably. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of that's kind of extreme. That's kind of extreme. But my point is, I think that you will run across, if you find, this is kind of realistic. Like if you find, once you go through like your 10th lead, you should be able to find something in those first 10 to wholesale or bird dog, unless you're marketing to the wrong people. You should be marketing specifically to motivated sellers, people who are most likely to be motivated to sell their homes. So we're talking pre-foreclosures, people who are going through pre-foreclosure. We're talking about death in the family. So death. What else are we talking about? Just old looking ugly houses, old ugly houses. So, when you download your list of landlords from PropStream or ListSource, or whatever other platforms they have out there like ListSource and PropStream, where you can download a list of landlords or homeowners. And once once you do get ready to download that list, you can filter it. You can look for people who are going through pre-foreclosure or had a death in the family, I believe. But you can also filter for old landlords, like landlords who have owned their properties for a long time, 10 years plus. You also be able to filter for these individuals. And these individuals, I must say, I've been doing this for 9 years, like I said. And this is where a majority of my deals came from. Old landlords, people who wanted to get out of the business, landlords who wanted to get out of the business. That's where most of my deals came from this. Sometimes I got a couple from death. Actually, just one or two from pre-foreclosures. Not that many from pre-foreclosures, surprisingly. Not that many, bro. Not that many from that. Not that many from old ugly houses that I look for when I'm driving around neighborhoods. They call this driving for dollars. That's what they used to call this. So I still do this. I like doing this. Like I said, I haven't received that many deals from this method, this marketing method. But usually what you do with this driving for dollars, you just drive around neighborhoods and you look for houses that are dilapidated, and you figure out the address, and then you send, in my case, I send a mailer to that homeowner, whoever owns that home. I send a letter to them, and I wait for them to call me back. I used to do cold calling, and I would cold call these sellers, these homeowners. But I never really. I think I got one from this. I think I did like one or two deals from this pile of old ugly houses. So riding around, but this, those were still leads. They were still leads. But this is where a majority of my deals come from. Old landlords, people who have owned their properties for 10 plus years, and they are tired of being in the business. This is where a majority of your deals will probably come from as well. I can't speak, for every investor out there, wholesaler, bird dog, or whatever. But in my case, a lot of my deals came from these people. And, you can easily filter these people out on PropStream. I use PropStream to download my list of names from. So you can easily, filter these people out. All you're looking for are landlords, and you can put they have owned. You can select that they have whether or not they have owned their properties for 10 plus years. So you can easily find these people. But like I said, man, you're gonna go through these leads here, and you may go through 7 of them, and you should be able to find one. This depiction here, this what I drew here it's kind of true for me. In my case, like if I run across 7 houses, usually when if I get to my third, like this will be my third lead right here. This is usually something when I get to my third lead. Every time I get to a third lead, is usually something that I can do something with. These first 2 may be duds. These first 2 may be, I'm thinking about selling, or maybe they want too much. But usually that third lead is something. It may be a no. It may end up being a no, but it's something for me to look at and sink my teeth in. And then maybe these deals will sell years later. So. They could be interested right now, but I have to fill them out. You have to fill them out. When you're talking to these sellers as well, you have to be nice. You have to be really nice and not be salesy. Just be yourself and just tell the truth. Tell them that you are looking to buy a house. You're looking to you've never, if you never purchased a property before, let them know. I let sellers know that today. I just recently went and looked at a property that I did a video on, and the landlord, he owned like 60 properties recently. He sold 20 of them, and he had this house that I went and saw for sale. And he asked me, he was like, man, he was like, I bet you're flipping all across town and making all kinds of money. And I was like, no, I'm not. I have never purchased a property before. I've been in the business of investing in real estate for 9 years. So I've been kind of tagging along other investors as they are, doing flips and things. And I let him know what I do. I told him that in the past, I was just finding deals for other investors. But now I'm in the position to buy a property for myself. So I told him the truth. I didn't lie to him. He's an experienced landlord, not one of my favorite landlords because his house looked like crap and he had his tenant living in there with the house looking like crap. So he never really maintained his properties well. So he's not my favorite, type of landlord, but he is an experienced investor. So I let him know, I let him know, and just how I would let anyone know. No, I have never bought a property before. I have no prior experience in real estate. I don't know how to fix up a house myself. The only thing I want from real estate is money. That's really the only thing. And money is the byproduct. Really, I like seeing things change for the better with properties. Because once you find one that an investor can buy and flip or rent out or whatever. Or, once you find this property and when you find it's most likely in bad shape, and then you give it to someone else, if you're bird dogging or wholesaling, you give it to someone else, and then that person turns it into a great property, and then they put a family in there. So, that's always a great thing. And that's kind of like the number one thing that I enjoy about, investing in real estate. We get to kind of clean up and paint the city a little bit. You kind of get to paint the city. You get to ride around and be like, what? I'm going to do something about this house sitting here on this block, making this block in this neighborhood look so ugly. I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to look for someone to buy this property and do something with it. That's a great feeling. So that's a great feeling. And then money is a byproduct of that. And then, it's a game. It's a game. Your winnings, is your check that you get, after closing. That's your winnings. So you always like to count your winnings. But like I was saying, you don't want to lie. You don't want to lie. You want to tell these people the truth. They really respect that. Every day. These are everyday people, bro. These are everyday people that you see in the grocery store, that you see out and about. walking around, driving around. These are ordinary people. These are not people that you need to try to impress in a these people are not like your boss or anything. If you're working for someone, you don't need to try to impress these people. You just need to be an ordinary, down to earth person. Um, so tell them the truth. I'm not one for trying to make yourself, because I used to do that when I first got into this business. When I first got into investing in real estate, I used to do that. I used to try to make myself sound more experienced than I was. I used to, try to make myself look rich. I would go out and spend, hundreds of dollars on clothes to, whenever I had a scheduled meetup with the seller or another investor, I would go out and try to buy, a wardrobe that would be fitting of someone who is really experienced and someone who is really knowledgeable about real estate and who has money. I was trying to exude how much money I had. And really back then I didn't have anything. But, the poorest people, they look the best, what I'm saying, for some reason. And that was true then. I was trying to make myself look rich because I didn't have the money to back up what I was saying, really. Back when I started investing, I only had like, tens of thousands of dollars, I probably had, you know, 10, 15 something $1,000 saved up to my name. And so I didn't have much of nothing. I didn't really have no money, period. And because $10,000 and all that, that's nothing, Once you start making money, once you start making some money, you realize that, man, $10,000, $5,000 in the bank is really nothing. I mean, if I had that in the bank today, just that, I would be freaking out. I would be crazy scared now, you know. But hindsight, man, I realized I was such a fool back then, trying to make myself seem like I was more than I was. Now, I got enough money for me, and I don't try to dress a certain way nowadays. I don't go spend, I don't go buy a wardrobe to meet this big investor or this big, this business person, whoever they may be. I'm comfortable in my own skin because, like, now I have some experience, and you can kind of get it from these videos. I'm kind of rough. I'm not really a teacher type. I'm trying to learn how to do this because, I realized that my knowledge, wherever it's at in there, what I'm saying, whatever you can get from me, it's in there, because I have 9 years experience doing this stuff, and I'm still doing it to this day. But I realized that this information, it's not for everyone. It's kind of slow paced. This is not really I don't teach a get rich quick scheme. My whole thing is not making $10,000 every month. Even myself, I'm in this for the long term. That's kind of what I teach. I'm teaching these principles and philosophies that I have about real estate investing, so you can use it in the long run. You kind of get expedited type of education with my channel and my teachings and everything, because I do have the 9 years experience, and I can show you things and tell you things that you may not have thought before. I guess I really don't look at what I teach as like the holy grail, but it will help someone. That's why I was so hesitant to even try to teach this stuff, because I feel like I didn't know that much. But I had people tell me, it was like, man, bro, you need to teach. You need to teach some people, because you know more than a person starting at on day one, and that is true. If you starting on day one, getting into this, you can learn something from my videos. But when you're talking to these sellers, like I said, just be normal. Don't do like what I did in the beginning and try to make yourself seem like you're more than what you are. Let these people know about your experience level. I mean, if it comes up, if someone asks you, how long have you been doing this? Or, or anything like that. If they try to dig into your background and try to figure out how long you've been doing this and your experience level, then you just tell them the truth. I mean, if they don't ask that, then don't bring it up, because you do want to make them feel comfortable that you will execute on what you're saying you're going to execute on. So you don't want to just put all your cards. You don't want to show all your cards at the beginning of the game, okay? But it's only if they ask. But I talk to these people like I do, my best friend. I talk to them like they my best friend. I always pretend like a seller is my best friend. I talk to them like I was talking to a person today. I got a call today. Someone called me from my direct mail campaign, and this lady, she was like, I need you to take my name off of your list. So she wanted to be removed from my direct mail campaign list. And I was like, oh, okay. So what I asked her what was her last name, and she said her last name. And then I said, okay, what's your first name? And she gave me her first name. And I was like, and I remembered her name from, because I study my list so much because I'm looking into these people like in depth. That's kind of what I teach in my course as well. Like I look into them, you know, fully. I look into people fully before I send them anything in the mail. I look into that person. I know a lot about them before I even send a mailer to them. So when they call me, I kind of remember some of these people. And I'm like, oh, yes, I remember you. That's what I told her today on the phone. I was like, oh, yeah, I remember your name and your situation. And I think I told her that I'm impressed by your portfolio of houses. That's why I even that's why I sent you something in the mail, because I was wondering if you wanted to sell anything, if you're tired of anything. Uh, and, she was like, no, I'm not ready to sell. I don't want to really sell. I just want you to take my name off your list. I'm not looking to sell right now. And I was like, okay. So, I took her name off the list and I said, you'll never hear from me again. You know what I'm saying? And that's true. Once I take a person's name off the list, I do try to remember to contact them years later. Like if someone calls and says they want you to remove them from your list, then you remove them. You don't actually remove them. You make sure you highlight that person and put an indicator there and a note that this person wanted to be removed from your list. And you should contact them years later. I probably will wait 3 or 4 years before I send that lady another piece in the mail. So like 3, 4, 5 years, because you don't want to bug people. You don't want to turn to a nuisance. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't want to do that. Even when you're going through a deal, you don't want to be a nuisance. You want to be the person that is helping the deal close. You do not want to be one of those people who are holding up deals because they're not getting their fair share or whatever. Whatever it may be, you need to work the details out. So you need to work out what you're getting and the problem that you have. And most of the time it's money. Sometimes the things that hold up a lot of these deals is money. Someone in the deal feels like they're not getting enough, so they hold up the deal, however they do that. And you really don't want to be one of those people, because that when you turn into that person, you become unliked. And once you do that, no one does any favors for you doing the deal. No one does any favors for you. So you want to make sure that you're an easygoing person. So when you're talking to these sellers, make sure you're an easygoing person and be truthful. And then once you do get them on the phone, you do want to ask them. The number one question you want to ask a seller is, what do you want for the property? And I'm writing this all the way out. What do you want for the property? How much do you want for the property? How much? How much? What do you have a price range? Price range. If they won't tell you how much they want for the property, like if they don't give you an exact number, like, okay, I want 50,000. If they don't tell you exactly what they want, then you ask them this, okay, if you don't have a price in mind, do you have a price range in mind? Sometimes when I hit people with that, with the price range, they kind of they because you ask them again. Once you ask someone something another for the second time, they're like, okay, I have to give this person something. That's what the seller is thinking. So asking twice is good, but you can't be so direct when you ask twice. You can't say, do you have a price in mind for your property? And they'll be like, no, I don't. I'm just saying what people will give me for it. And you can't ask them again, so what do you want for the property? You can't just be so direct. You have to ask it that second time you ask them what they want for the property, it has to be kind of indirect and it has to be put a certain way, nicely. Nice does win, in this business. Nice wins, bro. No one wants to be disrespected, upset, angry, mad. No one wants to be in those positions in this business, bro. You have to be nice as possible. You want to be, you want to stand up for yourself. Yeah. Sometimes people get that misconstrued with me, like, I'll be so nice, but I'm still kind of a hard. I'm not hard. I was going to say a hard ass, but I'm not necessarily that. I'm kind of like really stern, and I'm standing on what I believe. What I believe is fair. If I'm talking to investors, they may take me as being a nice person, but you know they shouldn't. They shouldn't, because I always surprise them. Because when it comes to working out the numbers and doing all that, I'm really, really into that. And I'm really like, hey, because sometimes investors would try to, they'll try to, give me low price. In the past, I ran into cash buyers, investors, people who I've wholesaled or bird dog houses to. They'll try to, give me a lower number than what I want. And when you run into that situation with people, you have to really you have to stand up for yourself. But the most important thing is you have to understand why they want to give you a lower price. Understand that. Ask them why. One time I had a guy, and a cash buyer. He wanted to give me $1,000 for a bird dog fee. So as a bird dogger, you just finding the deals and then you handing them off to the investor. And I told him I wanted $5,000 for this bird dog fee, and I wanted 5,000 to give him the house, even though I'm not negotiating anything. He's negotiating and everything. I just found the deal, and I'm giving it to him, and he's going to negotiate and do it. Work out the details, go to closing and everything, and then give me my check after closing. I told one of these guys I wanted 5,000, and he was like, man, you're not really doing anything, really. That's basically what he was saying. He was just saying it in a nice way. He was like, you're not really doing anything. I'm having to negotiate and do everything myself, use my contract and all that. How about I give you $1,000? And I was like, I told him, I was like, you know what, man? Why 1,000? Why do you think, my efforts are worth $1,000? And when I asked him that, he really didn't have a rebuttal for that. He really didn't have anything to say to that, because the truth is, he was not like, he didn't say this because I know it's kind of understood. He wanted to give me a cheap price because he felt like my position was insignificant. My efforts were insignificant, and he wanted to keep most of the profit for himself. You're going to run into people like that, stingy people, selfish people, greedy people. You're going to run into those people, but you have to recognize it. See, if they don't give you a good answer on, like in my case, like I asked him, I was like, why do you want to pay me $1,000? Why do you feel like what I've done is not worth what I'm asking for? 5,000. I mean, when you do the math on properties, once you do the math, and it's important to understand the math as well. So this is why experience is vital. So you want to be a bird dogger first, because I understood the numbers. I understood. I didn't understand them. That that much, like as much as that cash buyer understood them, because he has his own. Everyone has their own math, but there is a math that everyone kind of recognizes, because if the deal is low enough, it's obvious that you'll be able to make some money on it. And, if you're buying a house for 50K and in there's $100,000 spread there, you're going to make some money. The cash buyers, they have to factor in materials and labor and cleanup and all that, closing costs. They have to do more detailing than you, but everyone knows that if there's $100,000 of spread in a property from what you can buy from to what it could be worth, you're going to make some money. That's a good deal. People know that you're going to make some money, and you can kind of tell when cash buyers or investors are really excited about it. But see, this guy, I understood the numbers, and it just didn't make sense to me why you would want to give me $1,000. You have $100,000 in spread here. Even if you spend 50K, 60K, you're still going to make a healthy profit. So he understood that I understood that. After we talked for a while, I'm going through, the potential of the deal with him, and he understood that he couldn't fool me. So he paid me the 5,000. He didn't even negotiate. He didn't even come back and say, "Oh, what about 2,000 or 3,000?" He was like, "Okay, I'll give you the 5,000," because you're going to have people that will test you like that. But you gotta stand on your own 2 feet. You have to recognize. The deal. You have to recognize your worth in it, because he wouldn't have made any money, and this was a very lucrative deal. He wouldn't have made any money without me. So why not give me 5,000? Really, I'm getting crumbs. You really should be giving me 20. You know what I mean? You really should be giving me 20,000. But you know. So you do want to stand up for yourself. You want to stand up for yourself. So you want to be nice, but you also want to be, you do want to stand up for yourself, and you don't want to be an a-hole. You don't want to be an a-hole. You don't want to be a hard ass a-hole or asshole. You don't want to be a hard ass in the deals, because like I said before, people don't really like those people, so you have to iron out the details right then and there. Me and that cash buyer had to iron that stuff out. We had to get all that stuff out before it became a problem. You can't just, brush off, oh man, you can't just brush off these problems. Me and him had a problem right there. I wanted 5. He wanted to give me 1,000. I was like, bro, we got to stay on this phone until we figure this out. You know what I'm saying? We need to figure this out. We need to figure out something that's happy, something that will be great for both of us. So we both can walk away happy from this phone call. So I wasn't going to get off the phone with him until we ironed that thing out. We had to handle those issues. We had an issue right there. And see, if I would have just brushed it off, I would have been pissed down the line, going toward closing. I would have been pissed off, or he would have been pissed off. You have to handle those problems when they come up. And see, I'm all about that. I'm all about that. Like that's why my deals go so smoothly. Usually, sometimes, things will come up that you can't control, but that's why a lot of my deals go so smoothly, because like I handle the problems where they are. I remember one time I went to closing, and the cash buyer did not want to give the seller the money that we promised that we would give to her. So we told the seller, one time me and this cash buyer told this seller that we were going to pay for her closing costs, and she never forgot that. So we didn't give her any earnest money or anything like that. She asked for it, but I was like, you know what, we'll just pay for your closing costs because we don't, who does earnest money these days? No one really does earn it. I haven't paid. Last time I paid earnest money was way back when I first started. I gave somebody like $100 for earnest money. That's when I learned about wholesaling online on YouTube or whatever. And the person I was listening to said that he was giving out $10 for earnest money or $100. It just depends. But nowadays, man, like as I gained more experience and started doing it more and more, I realized that no one gives earnest money. Even these top, filthy rich cash buyers or investors that I've been working with, they don't do earnest money. They don't do that. So we told this lady that we wasn't going to give her any earnest money, but we said we'll pay for her closing costs, like because they were going to be minuscule. I mean, the deal was for 50 grand, so we bought her house for 50 grand, like this 50 I got right here. We bought our house for 50 grand, and the closing costs were like $1,000. You know what I'm saying? It was like $1,000, less than that actually, because when we got to the closing, she wouldn't sign the final documents for us to for the investor to buy our house. She wouldn't sign them because he would not pay for her closing costs. So I had got my check. I made like $5,000 from this deal as well. I had got my check and I was on my way home, and the seller called me and she was like, "Hey, the guy, the buyer here, the final buyer, he won't pay for my closing costs, and you told me that you guys will pay for my closing costs. So, I don't know what needs to be done, but I'm not signing anything else until someone gives me this." I think it was like $800 that she needed. She was like, "I'm not going to sign anything until I get this $800, until someone comes and pays this closing cost that I have right here." And I was like, "Okay, let me call you right back." So I was still on my way home, and so I called the buyer there. He was at closing as well, still there. And I was like, "Bro, she want, she needs her closing costs paid. Are you gonna take care of it?" He was like, "No, I'm not gonna take care of it." And I was like, "Why not? The deal is she's not gonna sign until you take care of it, until we take care of it." And he was like, "Well, I'm not gonna pay her." He said he wasn't going to pay her. And I could have made it a big issue. I could have made that a big issue. I could have been like, "Well, I'm not going to pay her," and he would have been like, "I'm not going to pay her." Well, this deal is done. Dude, we don't have a deal. We would have been, just going back and forth like that. But see, that late in the game, and I was already getting, so my check was 5,000, and she needed 800, and I was like, okay, if I give her $800, that means I'll be walking away with 4,200. And I was like, okay, I mean, it's still a significant amount of money compared to what I'm losing. So I decided to give her the $800 out of my money. So I turned around and I went back to closing, and I walked in and I did it. I was such a boss that day. I was such a boss because the cash buyer was over there looking like a little child. The investor that was buying the house from me. Well, I wholesaled this house to him. Yeah. So I wholesaled this one to this cash buyer, this investor. I don't work with that guy anymore because he's petty. He's really petty. I was like, he was getting this house for $50,000 and the house was worth like 100,000. He couldn't believe it when I took him to the house. He was like, "I can buy this for 50,000." I was like, "Yeah, you can buy it for 50 and give me 5. So then you all in at 55, but yeah, you give. Are you ready to come out of your pocket with 55K? If so, yeah, you can buy this." He couldn't believe it. So he this deal closed in like a week. He was that anxious about buying his property. It was at such a good deal, and it was a great house. It was a 1,500 square foot. It's like I always run into 1,500 square foot houses. It was a 1,500 square foot house, built in like the 60s. It was a nice house, brick. It was a brick house. It was really cool, And then he had a lot of people who worked for him that could do the labor. So he got a great deal, but he was so petty, bro. He was so petty. He wouldn't give this woman $800, and he got all this He could buy. He had $50,000 or $45,000 in the house the day he bought it. You know what I mean? And he didn't really have to do that much work to the house. I think he had his little, people who work for him because he had other properties as well. He had the people that work for him go in there and they fixed that place up for pennies. He just paid them pennies. So this guy was real petty. So I don't work with him anymore. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of the punishment because these people, these cash buyers, these investors, they need you. Sometimes they'll try to, they'll try to get you on price or whatever, but they need you. They don't want to lose you, especially if you're finding deals all the time consistently. It don't have to be all the time. It could be one a year. You could be finding a deal for someone once a year, but that one deal a year may be giving them an extra 50 to $200,000 a year. You know, but he was so petty. But I took the money out of my money. So I took the $800 that the seller needed to close, to pay for a closing cost. I took it out of my money. I walked in. I was such a boss. I walked in. I said, man, look, just take it out of my money. I threw my check, on the table to the closing person, the person that was doing the closing. I said, look, just take it out of my money. Just take it out of my money. She could just, take the closing out of mine and then just give me, whatever's left. And then I just walked out. I got, the closing person, the person that did the closing, she took the money out, wrote me another check for 4,200, and I just walked out. I didn't say nothing to anybody. I just walked out. And I wasn't angry. I just went in there and took care of business really quickly. I just went in there and paid, then walked out. And as I was walking out, the seller was signing. She was signing, and then that was it. But me and him could have been, at odds at that moment. But you gotta really analyze, is it worth the risk? Is it worth getting into this back and forth and jeopardizing this deal? You know what I'm saying? Because the seller could have walked out. You know what I'm saying? Walked out and been like, okay, you guys can't make up your mind. I'm out of here. I'm finding another buyer. So you do have to, like I was saying, you don't want to be a problem. You got to work out these issues, and you have to know. You have to be the person that helps the deal go through, even if it means that you're taking a lesser amount. You do want to stand up for yourself, because people remember that. They do remember that, because that cash buyer who tried to give me $1,000 for that one deal, he knew that next time he could not do that to me. He knew next time that I pay attention to the numbers. I pay attention to the deal just as much as he does. Probably not as much as he does, because he's more experienced than me. But he understands that, I'm not backing down. So you just got to watch out for people like that. And like I said, when you're talking to sellers, you want to ask, what do they want for the property and what is their price range? If they don't give you a price like this, you want to ask them a price range. And if they still don't give you a price range, then you may want to call them back. I really don't try. I really don't try to be an appraiser, in these situations. I don't like to try to give a seller a price first. I hate doing that. I like, from my experience, when people know what they want, the deal goes so much easier. And then also, when people know what they want, they're motivated. They're really motivated. That's a sign of motivation when they have a price, even if it's a high price. They have a price in mind. A lot of my best deals worked out the best. Well, they're my best deals. My best deals worked just like that. The seller knew exactly what they wanted, and it was a price that I was like, wow, it's a low price, really, really low price. So you want to try to iron this out, and everything else is just detail. Like, okay, if the bed, if they do give you a price, then you get the bed and bath count. You ask them, if they could grade the condition on a scale of, or 1 to 5 or A to D. If they could A to F, can they grade it from A to F or 1 to 5? the condition. So you just get there. You want to go see the property. You want to go see it. You don't want to be like a virtual wholesaler and not go see the property. You do want to go see the property. So they'll give you like a little grade. They'll say, oh yeah, the kitchen is bad, and there's a hole here, and you kind of you detail as much as you can. You write down as much as you can. You always keep you like a notebook when you're on the phone. You need it close by because you never know when they're going to call. So you keep you a notebook close by in your car. I keep one in my car, and I keep one in the kitchen, and I always keep one in my office. So I always have, a a pen and some paper around just in case I get a call really quickly. So you want to ask the bed and bath count, whether or not they have any liens, if they do, how much do they owe? You want to ask these questions. And if you forget something, you just call them back. Call them back. If you forget to ask a question, if you contact a cash buyer or investor and they say, well, what about this? Have you asked them about the square? What's the real square footage? Did they give you the heating and cool square footage, or did they give you like the total square footage, including the garage? Make sure you call them back. Make sure you ask them that. So you just call them back and you just ask them. You just call them back. So you ask these basic questions. You really want to know this. You really want to know this, and you want to know the address as well. That's kind of obvious. You want to know the address, so you can look it up and start looking at comparables and trying to get an idea of the value of the property. And you want to ride around the neighborhood if you can as well. If it looks good on the internet, like when you're trying to look at the value of the property, if it looks promising on the internet, then go to the neighborhood and drive around and look and see if people have been fixing up houses. And you can kind of see that as well from Zillow as well. You can see the comparables, properties that have sold right around that subject property. You can see them online. But I like riding the neighborhood as well. You know what I'm saying? I like riding the neighborhood and looking at the neighborhood and seeing what it looks like. But you just talk to these people, and you find you a cash buyer. And in my course, I have all this step by step in my course. So if you want to get the step by step version, then look in the description and get my course. But you get you a cash buyer, and I explain in the course how to find a cash buyer. And so once you have the lead, the seller, and the cash buyer, I mean, you're good, man. You're good. You need to start bird dogging. You just need to start out bird dogging. Wholesaling requires some more experience. You need to know the market, to wholesale. You need to you don't need to know the market, all the way. You just need to know what areas are good and what type of house works for the average investor, the average cash buyer. You need to recognize what kind of house a cash buyer can make money on. They can't make money on a house that's a teardown. They can make money on a house that's in good shape, that's in livable condition, or just under livable condition. Maybe it's in poor condition. No one can live in it, but it's not a teardown. They can make money on that as long as it's at a very low price, and you need to have a big spread, $50,000 to $100,000 in spread, or more. But in order to learn how to be a great wholesaler, because when you wholesale, you got to get the property under contract. You have to get under contract. And when you get under contract, you can't just be working for a cash buyer. You have to get something under contract. And you're kind of hoping that that a cash buyer will buy it from you at the price that you got it at. So in order to learn how to get it at a good price, you need to learn how the business works, how houses in your market are priced. What's a good deal? What's a great deal? What's an okay deal? What's a deal for an average investor or a new investor, cash buyer investor, or what's a deal for a contractor / investor? How many do you have any on your list? You build your list when you're bird dogging. When you're bird dogging, you're interning. It's like your internship. It's you building your list, and you're learning how how the business works and everything. So you're still getting paid, while you figuring everything out. But That's all I want to talk about today. I'll, touch more up on this later on in other videos. But I hope you have a great day today, and I'll talk to you soon.